Thank you all for taking the time to hear us today. We're going to, as has been suggested, we're going to just look at the impact of recent events and the future for corporate venturing. We have a distinguished panel of speakers here, leaders in their field. We have, as I say, Dong-Soo, who's joining us from LG. We have Antonio, who's joining us from Sony. And we also have Erica from UCB, all heading their corporate venturing panel section and funds. Maybe I could just start by asking you for a little bit of an introduction. So Dong-Soo, maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about your organisation and how your business has fared in the recent pandemic.
Sure. So again, it's an honor to be here today and with the distinguished panelists. So my name is Dong-Soo Kim. I'm the CEO of LG Technology Ventures. Of course, we're the corporate venture capital arm of LG Group. We are structured to manage funds, so as an independent CVC unit. So in aggregate, right now we're managing about $450 million. We work with 7 different LG companies, which includes LG Electronics, LG Display, LG Innotek, LG Chem, LG Energy Solutions, LG U+, which is a telecom arm of LG, and LG CNS, which is an IT systems integrator. So we cover a very broad area of technology because of the businesses of these 7 companies, and we invest mostly in Series A or later.
Thank you. Antonio.
Yeah, my name is Antonio Mitabile. I'm one of the directors in the fund. So actually, the CEO of the fund, Gensu Chikawa, is in Japan, so he couldn't actually make it. And I'm responsible for the VC activity actually in Europe and in Israel. We have an early stage investment vehicle and a growth stage vehicle that is kind of structured as GP-LP. So Sony is one of the LP investors in the fund. Also, we raised money from other LPs. And the early stage fund is $100 million, and the growth stage is $200 million. Although after Martin's presentation, actually, is really confused with the situation, so difficult to understand what is early stage and what is growth stage. We have in the portfolio about 100 companies, also like LG, it's very diversified portfolio because Sony has a very highly diversified business portfolio, and ticket size depending on where we actually. From which bucket we invest can be from $1 million to $5 million. Yeah.
Thank you. And Erica.
Hi, I'm Erica Whitaker. I'm the head of UCB Ventures, the corporate venture arm of UCB Pharma, which is a pharmaceutical company headquartered in Belgium but with operations worldwide. Our fund is an evergreen fund. We initially started out by making fund-to-fund investments, and then very quickly moved to direct investments in both digital health and biotech companies, and our sweet spot is seed and Series A investments.
Thank you. So with corporate venturing, obviously one of the key issues that was often faced is how does actually your organisation, how do your funds interact with the wider group that you may be a part of? Maybe I could start with Antonio. Antonio, maybe you'd like to say a little bit about that.
Yeah. So first of all, the kind of Sony activity as a CVC started in 2016. So it's relatively kind of new. I mean, we had previously a venture capital fund in Europe in kind of beginning of 2000, but then kind of we restructured. So we restarted the activity really in 2016. And there were 2 main kind of reasons for doing it. Yeah. One is, Japan, as we all know, is an island. Yeah. And the world is basically flat. Information goes at speed of light, so you cannot really rely only on your R&D. You need to have receptors and eyes and ears all over the world to monitor innovation, and that's kind of one of the roles of the CVC. And the second is. It's about identifying new path for growth, and being there kind of at the forefront of innovation, understanding what are the kind of key markets or key opportunities that we need to pursue in order to further grow. So that was kind of the key, kind of main reasons for starting this activity. And then this kind of evolved over time, meaning that, you know, if I look at all the investments that we have done, it's important to have kind of the strategic fit, but I think the kind of decision making cannot be only strategic when you make an investment. So you need to find the right balance between kind of the financial returns and return on investments and the strategic fit. So if you make investments too close to the strategic trajectory, chances to maximize the return on investment are very low. That's based on our personal experience. So you really need to find adjacent areas where you can actually provide financial means to the companies to build the ecosystem. That is an ecosystem that you can actually, if it becomes rich, you can actually go there with your core business and grow. And so having some sort of independency from kind of the business units, it is important to find the right balance. That's our experience.
Thank you. Erica, maybe I could ask you to see, obviously you're in a biotech sector where it's fair to say we've all been impacted by that over the past period of time. You know, has your experience been similar as interacting with the wider group? Have you been looking at businesses which are directly related to the group, or are you tending to look at things that are more adjacent to the
Yeah, we've got a different sort of strategy. The venture fund was actually set up to invest in areas beyond the current capabilities of UCB. So I like to say we invest in areas that are outside the comfort zone of UCBs, or novel modalities like cell therapy or novel biology, looking at new pathways to treat disease. And the whole idea is it's similar to what Antonio was describing, to be sort of frontier investors and looking what's out there, what's coming next, but we're going way out there. And the idea is that through our investment activity, UCB can make a better informed decision about where to go next. And actually, gene therapy is a nice example of, you know, how our playbook works. So our first direct investment several years ago was in a gene therapy company, and about a year and a half after that, UCB decided, because of the significant patient impact that gene therapy can have on rare diseases, that it was an area that UCB would like to build internally in research. And we just opened up our network to the company, and through our network, able to get advice on how to build, you know, certain capabilities and creative research supplies, and we directed them the company to possible acquisition opportunities to help build the pipeline, and that's really how we operate. But the other side of that is then we had to readjust our investment strategy because gene therapy is now core. So now when we look at gene therapy, it has to really be next generation, or what is beyond what we're doing internally. And that reset activity is possible because we work very closely with our research colleagues. We have multiple interactions. Most of us in the fund have worked in the company for many years anyway, so we have lots of networks. And even though there's there's a firewall between us and the rest of the organization, we obviously keep confidential information very carefully from our companies that we're investing in or evaluating, but there is plenty you can share on a non-confidential basis that gives the right exposure to our research colleagues to understand, you know, what's going on outside of our own activities and research.
It's interesting how you describe how actually you were at the vanguard of what became the group's core strategy, and now you're looking for the next development in that operation. So. Yeah,
it's fun. It's fun.
And also, you talked at the start about how diverse the LG operations are. How does your fund fit within the LG?
Yeah, so actually we do have a dual mission. So about 2/3 of our fund is earmarked to invest in companies that have more direct synergies with the different business units and R&D centers within LG. So those, we work very closely with them. Internally, we have what we call our middle office, which is business development team, who works with with our LPs, try to understand their strategy, and then find and also just connect the startups with the right people within LG, and also after investment support our portfolio in terms of collaboration with the people in Korea. But also we've earmarked about a third of the fund into more future-looking projects. Things that may not be on the radar for our R&D centers yet, but which we think is going to be important 3 to 5 years down the road. And for those kind of deals, we work very closely with the LG Group Strategy Office. So I personally interact with the group's CSO on a very regular basis, trying to understand what the LG Group strategy is and try to find the companies that would fit into that. So that's how we structure.
One of the, I guess one of the challenges, and from what you've described about how you interact with your wider group, is the sort of balance between assessing the strategic needs of the group and perhaps looking for that future or future development of the business as against core principles of economic performance. Is this an investment that you want to make? And I think Antonio alluded to the fact that they had found that it was better often to look at businesses which were perhaps tangential rather than directly relating to the business that they were looking at. Perhaps, Erica, maybe I can ask you, how do you look at balancing economic performance as against strategic needs?
Yeah, so the UCB is not measuring the performance of our fund on financial performance. It's a bit more woolly about bringing learnings and what sort of exposure. But our team, we take financial performance very seriously because obviously the financial performance indicates whether it's been a successful investment or not. And successful investments are the ones where you can learn most from and understand more about the field. When I talk about successful investments, I also include investments that fail fast. And so if you in biotech and pharma, you do, well, you want to find the killer experiment, which is what it's called. It's the experiment that really pushes the scientific hypothesis you're testing to the limit. And sometimes the killer experiment kills the hypothesis, and that's disappointing and a bit head-scratching. But if you manage your budget and your research effectively, you find out before you've spent a lot of the capital and get some of your capital back, so it's not all lost. So when I talk about successful investments, it's not just ones that get an amazing drug to the clinic and to patients and change their lives, but also allows us to learn quickly what may not be the answer in a very complex disease area. So for us, financial performance is very important at the moment, because I guess you all know with corporate ventures, sometimes you get a change in senior management or executive management, and maybe the focus changes. But at the moment, it's not financial performance, but we still take it very seriously.
And for Antonio?
Yeah, so I think today, especially today, I think it's very tough to get talents on board, compete with the guys that I shown before, and I think also for the team, it's important to have a KPI that is return on investment, because it kind of boosts the motivation as well, so it's really key to, in my view, to kind of, we have actually, one of the KPIs is return on investment, because I think especially for the growth fund, we have to return capital to our LPs, so we have no choice. so we are measured on it. But also for the early stage fund that is kind of 100% Sony Corp, we set as one of the KPIs return on investment, because it is kind of a key motivator as well, because people wants to see this immediate feedback. So I bet in this company, and I'm getting and it's doing great. Also, another point that is important to us, and I think that's kind of linked to what Erica said about kind of quick failing. I think, and also something that I heard when we went to Cambridge. So building an environment where it is safe to fail, it is really important, because this is a very risky business. Actually, the chances that things go right are very low. So, and you know, it's kind of if you look at the data, you know, most of the funds they make most of the money from very small amount of investment. Most of the investment they fail. So having an environment where it's kind of, you know, you can fail quick and it's safe to fail is really important. So those are the.
Yeah, I'm complete agreement. Actually, unless you have that the financial return as an objective, you're not going to have a successful CVC. I'm a strong believer of that. Obviously, for us, because we manage a fund, our performance is measured by the performance of the fund. But if you think about, I mean, in addition to attracting talent and all that, I mean, obviously you want your objectives to be aligned with the financial investors and also the entrepreneurs, which is at the end making money, right? So because if you have a divergent, you know, objectives, then that's where the tension happens, and that's where some of the bad behavior of some CVCs happened in the past. For example, you know, you see a lot of CVCs being criticized of making an investment and then not supporting the portfolio because the investment professional doesn't really care whether the company grows or not. They just want to try to meet the strategic objectives, which again does not align with the other investors. So, and also, in order to get any kind of strategic benefit, you want to be investing in companies that are growing, right? I mean, there's no strategic benefit you can get out of companies that are failing. So I do try to convince people in the business unit saying, hey, I know you're just focused on strategics, but if in order to meet your strategic objectives, we have to have the financial objectives front and center. So that's.
I mean, I think each of you have described how you fit within your organisation, but also how you seek to align with the strategy and in some cases, you know, help the business to evolve as a core group. Are there other ways in which you seek to demonstrate value to the group that you're a part of? But moreover, I guess, and perhaps as importantly, how do you seek to, with all the background that you bring and strategic objectives, performance objectives, how do you seek to demonstrate value to the actual investee companies when you're interacting with them? Maybe I'll ask that one first to Erica.
I wonder if I remember seeing data a couple of years ago about value to the companies we invest in, and I'm sure some people have seen the data. It's quite compelling, showing that investor syndicates that had a CVC as one of the investors performed significantly better in terms of the exits. It wasn't just biotech; it was tech and biotech compared to those who did not have a corporate venture fund. And so one of the things that we can do to help a company is that sort of validation, because it seems to be mantra almost that you want at least one CVC in your syndicate. But apart from the optics, those data are based on fundamentals, that what a corporate venture firm can do, and what we do as well, is at the right moment you can leverage significant parts of the organization to help that company get through difficult times, or to succeed even more than they could. And I think in all of our teams, and I don't know what you guys do, but I like to draw people out of the organization to come and work in venture. And so in our team, we've got people with quite varied backgrounds, research, business development, finance, banking, and all of that. Strategy really helps when you have that expertise around the table. Really helps the young company to grow and succeed. And finally, I think what I've really enjoyed when I'm on a board with institutional investors, as a corporate venture investor, is we tend to have just a bit of a more longer-term view than often an institutional investor will have, depending on what stage of the fund they invested in, for example. And that it's a nice sort of constructive conflict. So if you're coming at the investment with different perspectives and different objectives, the difficult questions get asked, and they're brought up at the board. And so you have I think just a much better mechanics of how the company is guided by the board. And so I think that those are the three things I think that I would pull on, that where we provide value. You know, apart from just capital, right? Because anyone, I mean, there's so much capital floating around, anyone can provide capital. It's the other stuff.
Antonio, would you?
Yeah, I totally agree. So capital is now, you know, it's abundant. so you need to bring something else. And so yeah, of course, you know, first of all, the advantage of being a CVC and the advantage of having amazing engineers in Japan and in Europe is that they help us to de-risk, let's say, in the due diligence, especially when we look at high-tech companies, and so we do that extensively. Yeah. So that's kind of on the due diligence and investment side. Also, what we bring to the company, well, there is a big industrial partner that is sitting in the boards that is actually not only to kind of giving the industrial view that often is missing, yeah, in startups, but also, in certain situations we open up our internal market, let's say. Yeah. But also we help locally, in doing stuff. For example, some startups, they lack structure, yeah, especially startup at a certain stage. In order to grow, they need to kind of build some structures, the right KPIs for the management, and actually we bring this type of structure because we have probably too much structure in big corporates and so on, and we tend to bring that, but also we help in the hiring as well. Yeah. We have kind of some startups that they went through some kind of change management, and so we kind of had to help and find a way to kind of convey and make this kind of a transition as smooth as possible. So we provide a number of kind of supports to them, and actually they value that. One thing that I have seen as well is that there is a big difference in being observer and just having a proper board seat. Especially at early stage, I think it's better to kind of be more in control. Yeah.
So you would actually push for a director's seat?
Yeah, I think at least, especially kind of at very early stage, I think that it requires a bit more guidance and more control. I think at a later stage, when you have already a management team that is kind of knows what they are doing, I think having a bit more kind of relaxed approach is okay. That's my.
Yeah, sure. So again, from I guess the corporate level, I mean, a big company like LG or Sony, there's a lot of resources that they can provide to the startup. Of course, if it's done right. Obviously, there's technology validation and maybe a business partnership or R&D partnership, all that. But it's very hard to do, actually. It's easier said than done. And I think that's where the role of the CVC comes in, is that we can act as a facilitator. So, of course, we're not going to make the final decision whether to partner with the startup or not, but we can put them in front of the right people, make a connection, also advise on the companies on how to work with our business units and R&D centers. And sometimes there's also, culture difference or miscommunication that we go out and try to resolve on behalf of the startups. So acting more like a champion of those especially the portfolio companies of ours. So that's, I think, is a big value that a CVC unit can provide. And also additionally, acting as eyes and ears to the different business units and R&D centers is a big role. Sometimes there's a new area of technology or business that people in for example Korea are quite interested, but in order to try to do R&D or directly be involved is quite a bit of risk because we have no idea how that particular sector is going to pan out. I think it's a lot better model to try to invest in some startups that are going into those sectors, see how they develop, and then at appropriate time you can decide to either to partner with a company or acquire a company. So I think it's a lot better model than the old days where the corporate R&D try to get into all these different projects and many of them fail. And so yeah.
I mean, from what you've described, you spoke at the outset about how you fit within your respective organisations. Clearly, a large part of the value you bring is from the group being able to interact, but do you also find that the investee companies worry about conflicts and how you manage those? Maybe Antonio or Dr.
Yes, again, I mean, right now I manage people mostly, but when I used to do deals, obviously I sat on boards both as an observer and a director, and there's always a concern on the startup side on protecting their technology and also working with the company's competitors, right? Let's say if I'm a board member from LG, they're thinking, oh, should we be working with Sony or Samsung or others, right? So there's always a concern. I think if it's done right, a lot of those concerns can be mitigated. So for example, in terms of IP, I think there's startups tends to be too concerned about the big companies stealing their technology and starting competing business. That I've rarely seen it happen. I mean, almost never seen it happen. Mainly because just if you understand how big company makes decisions and launches projects, I mean, there's no way you can compete with a startup which can move a lot faster and quicker. By the time big company decides to, okay, we're going to take this technology and develop something that's been, multiple cycles for startups to experiment with that technology. So I think there shouldn't be a big worry regarding that in terms of working with the company's competitors I mean, I think most sophisticated CVC units know that you have to allow the startups to operate freely. I mean, you don't want to provide any kind of restriction or on their business. I mean, that's just not a model that works well because you're not going to be able to get into the best companies if you do that. And so that, just shouldn't be the expectation. So again, I mean, just to sum it up, I think if it's done right, there shouldn't be too much concern for the startups to be receiving investment and working with a CVC unit.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think it's a little bit connected to what I said at the very beginning. So depends, your strategy and investment strategy, what it is. So if you invest too much close to the trajectory of your corporate, you may end up in a conflict situation as well. In that case, it's very complicated actually. I've been in these situations. So sometimes, not only, you are exactly in the direction, but also you have perhaps your competitor sitting in the board as well. So what do? Do you make an advice that then your competitor can also take? So it's really complicated. So to kind of draw the line, say, okay, let's invest in a kind of adjacent area, because that's where the sweet spot is. So that's how we resolved the problem. So that's basically and with regard to the freedom to operate, totally agree. I think that's investing in a company and then with the purpose of, okay, no, you cannot do this, you cannot work with the company, that doesn't work. We are already it's already very tough for us to deploy capital as CVC against Tiger and the other guys. If we start to put all those strings attached, then it becomes impossible to do the job. So.
Erica, is it similar for you?
Yeah, well, because our strategy is to invest in areas outside of what UCB is doing internally. I mean, if we see an investment opportunity that is competing with an internal program, and by definition, it's out of strategy. Right. So we don't have that issue. The firewall is respected. I think, maybe a decade or longer ago, I think there was expectation that corporate venture funds would get special rights when they invest. But that's old old school. Doesn't happen anymore. So there's not that concern. I've not observed it.
Thank you. In the last couple of minutes, as we wrap up, I thought maybe we would just bring it back to one of the features of today, which is actually we're meeting in person, which is a pleasure. And you know, we're fortunate in the sense that for Morgan Lewis, our offices are just a stone's throw away from here. But I know some of you have had to travel much further today. Maybe I could just ask you to say a little bit about how the pandemic has affected your business over the last year, and whether you expect any sort of lasting changes to come out of the way that you conduct your business processes. Dong Soo.
Yeah, sure. So we've been as active as ever through the pandemic, mostly based on video conferencing calls and so forth. But I do see video conferencing being part of the due diligence process, but I think the physical meeting, there's no replacement for that. I think it will come back. Actually, I'm a strong believer of visiting the company before investing and having that face-to-face interaction, but also seeing how the company is run and the atmosphere within the office and their labs and seeing their demos and so forth. So eventually, that physical component will come back. Same thing with, I think, networking with other VCs and CVCs. There's no substitute for meeting people in person. I mean, I've tried Zoom networking sessions, but for me at least, it just didn't work. So I think I'm just looking forward to now having more interactions physically now that we are finally able to travel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree.
I know you've all organised meetings around this conference for that very purpose, right?
So you know, first investments are basically based on a PowerPoint. Okay, so you can basically do more or less with virtual, with Zoom, okay, or Teams and so on. But then, if you want to do a follow-on, you really need to be with the company. You need to attend the board meetings, understand if the CEO and the CTO they get along, if the teams is well structured, if the board members, they are kind of providing advice and not going for a quick exit, and so those things, those intangibles are really key, and you don't get this from Zoom. So you need to be there, and also we are humans. We need actually 3D. I mean,
And are we going to get 3 for 3, Erica? Do you agree?
Yeah, well, I think what we've observed over the last year and a half is the digital disruption of business interactions. So I think we've realized that we can get a lot done virtually, so we don't need to, maybe we don't need to travel face-to-face to every single board meeting, and I know one of the things that's been a big eye-opener are the IPO roadshows where the poor CEO and CEO have had, go like a different city every day, and I don't think that's necessary anymore. I mean, there've been plenty of successful IPO. I mean, you've met the team already. So that IPO roadshow can certainly be done digitally now. So I think there's a nice balance, and as you said, there is. I mean, it feels really weird. I've invested in companies like all of you had, where you have not met face to face the company itself or some of the other investors, and that's just weird. So I've enjoyed now meeting companies again, and like you say, you never see on Zoom the interaction between the management team, the body language, and that is so critical because you can, pick up things that you wouldn't otherwise. So much can be done virtually, but some face-to-face can't be replaced. But I do not see us going back to the amount of face-to-face before, because we've demonstrated it's not necessary, and I don't think any of our CFOs will agree to a 10 times increase in travel budgets next year.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for the session today. I hope that the audience has found it informative. I certainly have. And it's been a pleasure. And I'm sure we've overrun, so thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.